Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for organizing this wonderful event. I've enjoying the talks very much. This one is a bit experimental. Also, I wanted to tell you that we are attempting to. I wanted to use this opportunity to try something new. My colleague Omid, has been teaching some of these philosophies in Iran, and then was talking to me in Erfurt about study of esotericism, which he did not know about, and got very interested in this and wanted to pursue this as a sort of academic career path. So that's how we come here to this sort of hybrid talk about a hybrid person, actually. Henry Corbin, born and died in Paris. For a time he worked and studied in Istanbul, and then later spent part of each year teaching and living in Iran. He was a member of the Eranos circle, also a Freemason, at least by the 1960s, initiated into the rectified Scottish Rite, and he reached the Beneficent Knight of the Holy City, or the CBCS, as well as he joined the Grande Loge Nationale Française, so a very high-ranking Freemason. Known for his unrelenting ahistorical approach that he called act of presence, and his idea of the imaginal and imaginal world. Around 1930, he read Heidegger's Being in Time. Based on this, he traveled to Germany, having also taken an interest in Lutheran theosophy and Jakob Böhme. During his stay in Marburg, he visited the university and met Rudolf Otto, who made a great impression on the young scholar. By coincidence, that same day Otto was being visited by the Bengali philosopher Rabindranath Tagore and the theosophist Olga Frobe-Kapteyn. Otto and Kapteyn would go on to initiate and organize the Eranos circle in Ascona. Corbin became friends with Frobe-Kapteyn. You can see them both here. He participated in the Eranos conferences, forming significant relationships with Carl Jung and with Anton Febvre, for whom Corbin likely functioned as a kind of mentor in the academic study of religion. In the 1930s, the French scholar of Sufism, Louis Massignon, had given the young Corbin a copy of Suhrawardi's Kitab Hikmat al-Ishraq, which changed his life. According to Corbin, Massignon told him there was something for him in this book. This is a quote from Corbin. That something was the presence and company of the young Sheikh il-Ishraq. This one. And it is something that has never left me over the course of my lifetime. I have always been a Platonist. I believed one is born a Platonist, just as one can be born an atheist or a materialist, etc. The young Platonist that I was could not help but burn at the very contact of he who had been the Imam of the Persian Platonists. End quote. Another Shiite thinker, this one, of great importance to Corbin, who is thought to have carried the work of Suhrawardi to its fulfillment, is Mullah Sadra. Sadra famously synthesized and completed the peripatetic Avicenna school, Neo-Aristotle, and the Illuminist school of Suhrawardi, or Neoplaton. He then extended the system to the Sufism of Ibn Arabi and fused it with the doctrines of Shi'ism. He called this philosophy transcendent because it is above and covers all of these things. Corbin was also connected with the well-known traditionalist scholar Sayyid Hossein Nasr, who was influenced by René Guénon, Frithjof Schuon, and Ananda Coomaraswamy. Nasr was born in Iran and later educated in America. He recounts that he first read Corbin's writings on Avicenna and Suhrawardi while he was working on his doctorate in Harvard in the 1950s. But he did not meet Corbin until he returned to Iran following his studies in 1958, when he became associate professor at Tehran University. During this time, Nasr began intensive studies with several masters of Islamic philosophy, one of those being Muhammad Hussein Tabatabai, one of the most important modern thinkers of Shia Islam, whose influence remains widespread in Iran even after the revolution. Corbin had been present at many of these sessions with Nasr and Tabatabai. By this time, Corbin had established himself as director of the French Institute in Tehran for Iranian studies. According to Nasr, when Corbin was present at these sessions with Tabatabai, Corbin would often choose the topic. Two Shiite philosophers interested Corbin greatly, Suhrawardi and Mullah Sadra. During Corbin's time in Iran, Tabatabai was the main representative of Mullah Sadra's philosophy, and he remained strongly connected to the influence of Sadra in Iran up until today. Corbin dealt with these themes in his books on so-called Iranian Islam. He also translated some of the writings of Suhrawardi and Mullah Sadra. In volume 4 of his On Islam Iranian, this one, Corbin refers to an esoteric tradition he calls the prophetic philosophy of Shiism. And he calls Mullah Sadra the par excellence of the quote-unquote Platonists of Persia. Here is a quote from this book, from Corbin. Mullah Sadra professes a notion of matter close to that of his contemporaries, the Cambridge Platonists, such that the frontiers between spirit and matter are abolished in the mediation of the mundus imaginalis, whose metaphysics, inaugurated by Suhrawardi, is completed in Mullah Sadra, end quote. Here, Corbin is discussing the move from 4 worlds of Suhrawardi to 3 worlds of Mullah Sadra, in whose cosmology Malakut, this intermediary world, or Alam al-Matal, are congruous. He combines these two, basically. Corbin is quite impressed by this notion he finds in Mullah Sadra, this triad, this intermediate imaginal world situated between the spiritual world of pure intelligences, Alam al-Aql, and the material world of sense perception, Alam al-Hes. And it is the active intelligence, Aql fa'al, which Corbin compares to the nous poeticus of the Greeks, which facilitates this upward ascent to the source of divine knowledge. But to better understand this complex esoteric philosophy, my colleague Omid will explain this a bit further to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Actually, during the Shia history, many scholars with different perspectives tried to interpret the word aql according on their own background. Sadruddin Muhammad Shirazi, also known as Mullah Sadra, is one of the most prominent figures of post-Abyssinian Islamic philosophy, based on his philosophy, or better say, Theosophy, transcendent wisdom. He interprets this word in 3 meanings which are related to each other. First, he raised this word to the level of cosmology under the title of Alamul Aql, world of intellect. This is the first meaning of Aql. It's kind of cosmology, and this is the highest level of the human, and this is the actually highest level of worlds, and it's a completely immaterial world. The second meaning of Aql is the level of anthropology, and is the highest level of human soul. And the third meaning is a mediator and connection between the two, presented under the title of active intelligence or aql fa'al. Since Sadra cosmology and anthropology are based on the principles of his ontology, I will briefly state 3 important principles of his transcendent philosophy, because these 3 are different from Plato, because the first principle is primacy of being, opposite of primacy of quiddity. Primacy of being means whatever fills the external and the real world and is the source of the effect is the existence of objects, not their quiddity. The quiddity of things is only form and limitation, which our mind abstract based on this limitation. This is the first principle's existence is real, and quiddity is just a form, not a real. The second principle is a graduation of being. Tashkik wujud in Arabic we say. Tashkik means graduation of being. Existence is a single truth and has single common meaning, but differs in the degrees of perfection or imperfection, intensity or weakness, as light in this sense. And interesting things, whatever Sadra said about being and existence, he repeated for knowledge. Also, he said the primacy of knowledge and graduation of knowledge. because for him, knowledge is the elixir. Knowledge is the first and knowledge is the last. And the third, principle is substantial motion. It is completely different from previous philosophers. Al-harakatul jawhariyya means all things, animate and inanimate in the physical world, are constantly changing and moving toward their own perfection. This motion toward perfection occurred within the very substance to the entity and is nothing other than an intensification of the wujud or being. This is the three important principles of his ontology of Sadra. Let's come back to the cosmology. In Sadra cosmology, there are three universes, and each universe has a special characteristics. The first one and the highest one is Alamul Aql, the world of intellect, which is a world that is purely immaterial and the first state and the highest level of being. In religious language, we said Alamul Malaika or angels. Sadra said the world of intellect, completely immaterial. The second word is Alamul Misal or imaginal world or imagination world or Malakut. Then this universe is the link and intermediate between the intelligence universe and physical sensory world. And this world, some characteristics of physical world and some characteristics of intellect world. And actually, it could be dark, could be light, both. This is the second word, and the last one is physical word. This is the cosmology of Sadra. He believes in three words. Now let's talk about the anthropology of Sadra. For Sadra, the human beings is the embodiment of all three worlds. All three worlds actually are in the one human beings, but in potential, not in actual. His body is the embodiment of the physical sensory world. His soul, or we call it nafs, his soul is the embodiment of the alamul mithal or malakut, and his esprit or aql is the embodiment of intellectual world. In other words, there are three realities in human beings: the intellectual, the psychic, and the physical. And the psychic realm is intermediate, we call it barzakh, between the intellectual and the bodily. Sadra prefers to say that the soul has an existential root in both the world of the intellect and the world of nature. Such it is engendered, so to speak, on two different planes of existence. Sadra, convinced of the soul as a simple, holy, and indivisible substance, with its origin in the immutable, immaterial, and purely intellectual or angelic realm of the Malakut, but which nonetheless also exists in and journeys through the world of temporality and change. Actually, Sadra differs from his predecessors, especially from Avicenna, in that for him, the soul is not a fixed reality. Interesting things, Sadra believes that soul and soul or nafs, at the beginning, it's not immaterial, it's bodily, it's material. But when this soul continue according substantial motion, it's become immaterial. It's different from other philosophers that believe soul is not immaterial, soul is material at the beginning. For Sadra, the substance of the human being is, of course, the soul. So, a soul, we are soul, not intellect. Intellect actually is something gift from God. Our reality, our substance is nafs. We could be reached to that world and actually activate that one, but it is not our substance. And this substance moves between the two poles and is transmuted as the individual passes from potentiality to actuality in the development of his or her physical, psychic, and spiritual faculty. As the human soul intensifies it becomes increasingly independent and being to pull away from the body, hence the gradual process of decay, until the soul reaches its final early perfection and sheets the physical body entirely. So, if I want to conclude, the word aql, because we are talking about one of them has a cosmological meaning, the world of intellect. The second one is a faculty of human, and another term for aql fa'al, when soul actually intensify until this word can get knowledge from that word, but the intermediate of aql fa'al. In the religious language we call Gabriel, but philosophers said aql fa'al or Gabriel. Thank you.
So, thank you. We should ask, is there anyone who disagrees with this conception of Sadra in Iran? And there is. And I'd like to introduce this school of philosophy to you, known as Tafkik School, founded by Mahdi Isfahani, founded in the 1920s in Mashhad. Through his various lectures and courses that he gave there, the influence of Isfahani is very great and has gone on to inspire a number of other scholars and jurists who share or were inspired by a similar idea, namely, the belief that seeking knowledge through a path other than through the 12 imams is equal to denying them. Tafkiks are all about a critical method that is based on revelation and rooted in scripture. The central tenet of the school is that mysticism and philosophy are separate, and that relying on scripture itself is the only way to achieve a true understanding of Islam. While philosophy might be valuable in other knowledgeable pursuits, it is held strictly separate from religion, and the application of philosophical exegesis applied to Islamic scriptures is not only a wrong approach, but potentially anti-religious. Such an approach has remained common in Iran until today, as represented by Mohammad Reza Hakimi and Mohammad Taqi Sohani. Tafkik understanding of aql. For Corbin, he had rejected this opposition between mysticism and philosophy, preferring to the word theosophy when he translated, which he connected to the Arabic concept of divine wisdom, or al-hikmat al-muta'aliyah. He also heavily emphasized the importance of esoteric interpretation, or ta'wil, and the distinction between zohar and batin, or esoteric and exoteric interpretations of Islamic scripture. Tafkikis, on the other hand, reject all forms of esoteric interpretation and the idea that the Quran has hidden meanings. Divine wisdom, or hikmat, is just what the Quran says it is. It does not need Hellenistic modes of interpretation. From the beginning, the hadith and the imams functioned in terms of an alternative understanding of reason, or aqla, to that of the neo-Platonists and Aristotle and their adherents. Later philosophers, especially in the medieval period, succeeded in combining and even naturalizing these philosophies within Shiite tradition, and Mullah Sadra stands at the peak of this activity in the Safavid period. His grand synthesis, which I want me to explain to you, assisted in allowing philosophy to be taught in the Shia seminaries. The main opponent of the Tafkiki is, in fact, Sadra's transcendental philosophy, which employs the concept of aqla in special philosophical ways concerned with elevation through the acquisition of esoteric knowledge. Sadra is dominant in the present Shia seminaries in Iran today through individuals such as Tabatabai, Nasra, and Corbin helped him achieve this extraordinary level of influence. Tafkiki therefore oppose this Hellenistic hikmat and they argue for Shia hikmat. They reject esotericizing the text and ta'awil, intellectual activities that Corbin placed a great deal of emphasis on. What Tafkikis reject is precisely Sadra's form of holistic philosophy, what Corbin promoted as essential to Iranian Islam, or prophetic philosophy. But it's not that Tafkiki oppose philosophy per se, but rather they say that we seek a non-Greek inflected version. Another important contrast with what Corbin says about finding true Platonism in Suravardi. Thus we have different understanding of aqla. They have a different understanding of aqla. They reject both philosophy and Sufism and advocate that the only divine light of Allah and his prophets should be followed. So aqla is therefore not the nous poeticus of the Greeks, as Corbin suggested. But it's crucial here to also point out that applying the concept of exoteric to the Tafkiki is also incorrect. Isfahani had a meeting with a mysterious master he called the owner of condensed knowledge, perhaps bad translation. who instructed him in higher teachings, but he also had a vision of the handwriting of the hidden Imam, the Mahdi, which informed him that to deny the 12 Imams is to ignore them. And this divine revelation influenced him for the rest of his life. So in other words, this distinction between exoteric and esoteric, so common in the study of Western esotericism, does not hold the same analytic accuracy in the case of Iranian Islam. So coming to conclusion, esoteric knowledge brokering is how I want to attach it to this notion of privacy. A recent essay criticizes Corbin's approach as being prone to the later ideologies of the Iranian Islamic traditions that developed in connection with the revolution, which the author refers to as a nativist ideology. In this reading, Corbin dehistoricized Iranian Islam, downplayed its rational elements in favor of mysticism, and referred to it as theosophy instead of philosophy, reducing it. Corbin's approach was irrational and ahistorical, hence theosophy. But this seems odd, as one could just as easily argue that Corbin was elevating this private knowledge to which he had been granted access. Unless we hold to this Eurocentric model that sees secular philosophy as somehow more worthwhile, more respectable than quote-unquote theosophy. Such arguments rest on Eurocentric assumptions, even when penned by non-Westerners, which Corbin was expressly concerned with confronting in his attempt to legitimize Islamic philosophy as a living spiritual practice. Another recent critique of Corbin argues that he was anything but an Islamicist, but rather the greatest esotericist of the 20th century. And that furthermore, his Shiite esotericism is wrapped in a core of German Illuminist Lutheranism and refers to Corbin's Shiism as Protestant eschatology. This is Corbin in Ascona. I like this picture. So what exactly is Corbin's legacy? One crucial aspect is that Corbin approached Shiite and Iranian philosophy on its own terms, an esoteric philosophy that had been kept private from Western audiences. He engaged it ahistorically, instead of as only a historian or an Orientalist, which had been the way of his European forerunners. In a sense, he was ahead of his time, preceding approaches like that of the Iranian metaphysicals, which seeks to use non-European philosophy as a means of highlighting, arguing against, and providing solutions for the intellectual and social problems existing within a European context. As Nasr himself once stated, quote, Corbin's contribution to the intellectual and philosophical self-awareness in Iran must never be forgotten, end quote. Some scholars could ask, how is it possible that Corbin understood the philosophy of a non-European culture, an esoteric philosophy kept private from the West? But we might say, thinking with Mullah Sadra, that through all of his studies, Corbin had intensified his level of esoteric knowledge, of his aql, to such a degree that he was able to reach an understanding within this intermediate imaginal realm, the world of Malakut. Thank you.